And welcome back to Who Would Win. Today's Who Would Win comes to us from Silent Rise, who asked the question, who won a fight, Harry Hart from the Kingsman Secret Service or James Bond from the James Bond franchise? No, I will say this. I think there is a pretty clear-cut answer, but there's a caveat to that. Both these individuals are trained for their own respective Secret Services, MI6 and not MI6. Sorry, it's MI6 is MIF. Sorry, basically, British Secret Intelligence. So James Bond's trained by British Secret Intelligence. He's fairly capable of hand-to-hand combat. Particularly the Daniel Craig one is a bit more of a physical powerhouse because he's a younger version of the character. So he's far more in shape. He's also far more sociopathic compared to what we see later on in the series. Harry Hart, I'm actually not sure how old Harry's supposed to be. My guess is he's supposed to be somewhere in his 40s. But he's still fit. Now, he's unlike Bond, he's not physically in peak condition, but he's a man who's in good shape and he knows how to fight. Plus, he's armed to the teeth with God knows how many gadgets, from whatever he has within his wristwatch to his glasses, obviously the umbrella, the knife in his shoe that's laced with extreme poison. But they're trained a bit more for espionage than even Bond is. But at the same time, they're trained to handle more situations than Bond is. The question is, who would win in a fight between these two? Well, first off, we gotta, as always, kind of gotta go over each version of Bond. Now, I kind of lump Daniel Craig. I kind of lump Roger Moore and Sean Connery in the same category of Bond. They're more the gentleman spy, though Sean Connery is a bit gruffer. They're also not very... They're trained. It's a very realistic for the time kind of a way of their fighting, but at the same time, it's very clunky. It's very... It's kind of like that, which in some respects would be a real way of fighting. But then you look at the Daniel Craig James Bond, or even the Pierce Brosnan James Bond, and that was a lot faster, but still looked like it was a real way of fighting. Yeah, it was obviously choreographed, but if you're a skilled enough combatant, you would move that way. So, given their era, the Roger Moore and Sean Connery Bond would be out of there. Timothy Dalton probably would also be out of there. The problem here is that the only two Bonds that could really go toe-to-toe with Harry in a physical confrontation are Pierce Brosnan and Daniel Craig. Daniel Craig more so, but Pierce Brosnan still is relatively capable. But we see how well trained the Kingsmen really are. They can fight very flowingly. Like they don't stop very often unless they're getting their asses kicked. And I think Pierce Brosnan's Bond would suffer from that. Though Pierce Brosnan's Bond does have the advantage of having at least laser watch, a pen, sometimes a pen that's actually a bomb. Problem ultimately is that Harry automatically comes into a fight with his gadgets. Bond does not. He might have a gadget, depending on which movie you're looking at, but he doesn't automatically go into a fight with any of his gadgets. Daniel Craig, no. Now, Daniel Craig is a crack shot. I mean, he loses a step in Skyfall, but he's generally a crack shot. Same with any of the Bonds, honestly. The only one who could really, if Harry loses access to his gadgets, and it's just a physical fight, Daniel Craig's the only one I actually say would beat Harry. And that's just simply because he's younger than Harry, clearly. If we're looking at this Bond in his prime, he's younger than Harry, probably by a good 10 years. When we see him in Casino Royale, it's not actually said what his age is, like it's not said what Harry's age is. If we're assuming Harry's in his mid-40s, like maybe 45, it's a guy in his mid-40s. So it's not a young man, but hardly an old man. Whereas Daniel Craig's Bond is clearly some guy the character at any rate, is depicted as someone in their early to mid-30s. Probably I'd go mid-30s, honestly. Because as we know, because Quantum of Solace takes place basically immediately after Casino Royale, so he hasn't aged really at all in that case. Then Skyfall happens, and he's already been Bond for several years since then, and he's out of the game for a while afterwards. So at that point, he's probably hit his 40s. I'd say Bond's probably somewhere in his mid to late 30s. But again, just looking at them physically too, Bond is clearly someone who's in much better shape than Harry. And it's clear he can take punishment, as we saw with Le Chiffre, just wrecking his sack. So if Harry loses all of his gadgets, like the umbrella gets knocked away, the knife in his boot malfunctions, and maybe the watch gets thrown off, and it just comes down to a physical hand-to-hand fight, Daniel Craig's James Bond is going to take that fight. Because he's just, it's partly training, it's partly physical shape, but it's also mentality. Daniel Craig's Bond is just a mean son of a bitch. He just does not give an F. Whereas manners maketh man. There's a code that the Kingsman don't get me wrong, the Kingsman will fight dirty as well, because they have to. But normally speaking, they still follow kind of that whole idea of the gentleman nature. Now in a fight, that doesn't mean much, but still, it does carry over to some degree. So ultimately, Harry wins this fight because, with the exception of if he loses his gadgets, and even then, only if he's really fighting the Daniel Craig Bond, and maybe to an extent the Pierce Brosnan Bond. Harry would take more of the fights with the Pierce Brosnan Bond, but Pierce Brosnan Bond is probably the second best we've seen in terms of actual hand-to-hand combat, particularly if you look at the fight he has in GoldenEye with Alex, 006. That's a solid fight he's having. Like, that's a legitimate fight he's having. Ultimately, though, yeah, Harry actually beats Bond. Harry beats Bond pretty soundly, simply for the fact that he comes into the fight with a lot of gadgets. You're almost always going to have those on call, whereas James is not. James will have his Walther PPK at best. As regular equipment. Something else he could have something else on his person, but normally speaking, especially with like the Daniel Craig Bonds, we don't see that on him very often. Now, to be fair, in Bond's defense, he's a quick thinker and does know how to think on the fly. Again, particularly the Pierce Brosnan and Daniel Craig ones. The Roger Moore and Sean Connery ones, they demonstrated that too, and so did Timothy Dalton. But it was definitely the thinking on the feet kind of Bonds were more Daniel Craig and Pierce Brosnan more than anything else. And that might stem from the time period they were made. So ultimately, they might last a little bit longer in the fight, but Harry's going to win the fight. That's just the way it works. At least in my opinion. In my opinion, Harry takes the fight. And that really just stems from the fact that he's never without some sort of equipment on him. So, yeah, I got to go Harry. But what do you think? You think it's Harry or do you think it's Bond? See, I love Bond and I love Harry. I love Kingsman. I love James Bond. And I would love to give them honestly, I was hoping to get the fight to Bond, but as I looked into these guys a bit more, I'm like, and I thought, I'm like, nah, Harry's going to take this fight. And as it plays out, yeah, Harry would take that fight. He's just armed to the teeth pretty much. So, yeah, ultimately I got to go Harry. But that's just my opinion. Put in the comments below, if you think James Bond could win the majority of the fights among any of the James Bonds. Or if you think Harry wins, let me know that too. Also, if you have an idea for who would win, Star Wars, Superior Magic, what if, anything to do with the channel, put that in the comments below. Let me know. I'll do a review of it at some point. Same with any review you would like us to maybe get to at some point. Hit that bell for notifications if you want to be notified. I got my what if for today, and I'll be done. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. See you next time.